Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Clinton Presidential Center. I'm Stephanie Street, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Clinton Foundation. We're thrilled to have you join us tonight as we celebrate the opening of our two newest exhibits, Pigskin Peanuts and Heartbreakin' Peanuts. Very new, exciting exhibits following on the heels of Chihuly and Oscar de la Renta. This exhibit is really focused on families, so we're thrilled that you all could be with us tonight. I also want to recognize a great friend of mine who just popped into town today. Kirk Hanlon worked with me at the White House many years ago as President Clinton's trip director, and he now serves as Assistant Secretary at the Department of Agriculture. So Kirk, we're really happy that you're with us this evening. 65 years ago this year, yes, applause for Kirk. Got your photo with Snoopy, so he's going to take that back to D.C. for sure. 65 years ago this year, 3 kids appeared on the funny pages of 7 newspapers. Over the next 50 years, Charlie Brown, Patty, and Snoopy would be joined by a whole cast of characters and forever change the landscape of the Sunday comics. When Charles Schulz announced his retirement in December of 1999, the Peanuts comic strip was syndicated in more than 2,600 newspapers worldwide, with books translated in over 25 languages. The universal appeal of Peanuts can be attributed to Mr. Schulz's unique ability to connect to his audience in ways that many other comic strips could and still cannot. As each character's personality developed over the years, readers came to intimately understand Linus's attachment to his security blanket, Charlie Brown's heartache over the little red-haired girl, Schroeder's devotion to Beethoven, Peppermint Patty's prowess in sports and failure in the classroom, and Lucy's knowledges of, well, everything. We are so glad tonight to welcome so many families here. You are the reason that we bring exhibits like Pigskin and Peanuts and Heartbreakin' Peanuts to the Clinton Center, and why we always strive to have something new and exciting for all of our visitors of all ages. Now, we have some very special guests with us tonight. Please help me welcome them. First, I hope you've all had a chance to meet Snoopy. He'll be around after our program this evening as well, taking pictures and visiting with all of you. And we can't imagine a better way to kick off this exhibit than without having Snoopy here, so we're very excited about that. We also want to welcome the curator from the Charles Schulz Museum, Corey Katzenberg. Corey, will you stand and wave so everyone can see you? Corey will be here tomorrow morning presenting another free family program. I'll be beginning at 10 a.m., so we're excited to have you with us as well. Welcome. And now I'd like to please help me welcome our special guest, Karen Johnson, who is going to tell us more about our 2 new exhibits and the wonderful characters and the artists who created them. Karen is the executive director of the Charles M. Schulz Museum and Research Center. So please join me in welcoming Karen to the podium.
Well, thank you. It has been a delightful time in Little Rock. Just a point of personal privilege. This is quite a day for me to be in this man's presidential library. As you can imagine, he is my generation's president. So for me to be able to be here and see the work that meant so much to me personally, but also to the world, is quite thrilling. And I thank you all for that. And I thank you for everything you do to keep this going. So my job today is to talk a little bit about Charles Schulz. Now, I want to let the kids know that along the way, you're going to hear about a little guy who was 6 years old, and when he was 6 years old, he decided he was going to be a cartoonist. So I want you to think about that as we go through these slides. This little guy that I'm going to talk about knew what he wanted to be when he was 6. So also, who knows how this will work out? Technology and I are not best friends. And if it doesn't work, I'll just keep talking. It'll get more entertaining, let me tell you. So I've got a slideshow, and I want to just kind of walk you through this. So, here we have, I love this photograph, because this is him with his cousin Richard in Minneapolis, St. Paul, cold winter, and the football is set up forever. And it just tells you how deep the roots are for Charles Schulz, the artist that is in Peanuts. So it's, to me, such a, when we discovered this picture, I was like, oh, really? He's like 3. So anyway, isn't that great? His cousin Richard, we still don't know. Was Richard the model for Lucy? We don't know. But we love the poignancy of the fact that he's a toddler and there's his cousin holding the football. So let's start. I'm going to start, he talks about the fact that truly when he was 6 years old, he knew he wanted to be a cartoonist. And he started drawing very, very early in his life. And the whole comment here about, in kindergarten, I drew a man shoveling snow, and my teacher came over to me and said, "You're going to be an artist." He remembered that because it was a poignant moment for him to learn what it meant to be an artist. So here he is. I usually, the baby pictures, there's one picture of him with his father, one with his mother and his grandmother, but this is my favorite, one of my favorite pictures. There's another one about this age. So children, once again, you may be up here, your childhood pictures could be up here someday. So keep in mind when you brush your teeth and comb your hair for that school picture. But I love this because although he has melancholy and he looks a bit sad, this is Charles Schulz. For the rest of his life, he looks straight forward in cameras, he wears glasses, and I love this picture of him. And for those of you who don't know, the way that Gene Schulz and I like to describe Charles Schulz's life in total is a little bit like a fairy tale. His father and his uncle read the newspapers prolifically. And as you know, if you've studied anything or even remember, in the 1920s and the 30s, the funny papers were really our entertainment. It's what people talked to each other about on Monday, what happened with Prince Valiant, what went on in Crazy Cat over the weekend. Well, the most popular cartoon character when he was born, out of the Barney Google and Andy Gump cartoon, was Sparkplug, the old beat-up horse who won the race. And 5 to 6 months prior to Sparky being born, this was the most famous cartoon character in the world. So, as only a brother could do to a sister, Charles Schulz is born. Dina's brother comes to see the new baby and goes, "Oh, let's name him Sparkplug." And she said, "Sure." So from 24 hours old, we can't say exactly, he was named Sparkplug. And he went for the rest of his life, and he called himself Sparky. He answered the phone, "Hi, Sparky." Sparky? I mean, if it was business, he would say Charles Schulz. But he was Sparky Schulz for the rest of his life. So just to let you know, because that's how I will refer to him. And then very early on in his life, he had one of his dogs was Spike when he was 12 or 13 years old. Spike's a hound and a pointer, and he thought Spike was magical because Spike he ate hot potatoes, he ate tacks, he thought he knew 50 words. So he wrote to Ripley's Believe It or Not, and this is his first published art. And it says C.F. Schulz, and it's supposed to be C.M. Schulz, submitted to talk about his dog. And then when I talk here, Spike, there's Spike, and then Snoopy becomes Snoopy. When their dog died, Charles Schulz remembers his mother saying, "The next dog we should get, we'll name him Snoopy." Snoopy is a word a mother uses for endearment. Norwegian, it's a Norwegian word. And when he was getting ready to put the dog in the strip, he was originally going to name it Sniffy. But he was walking by a window one day, and he saw that there was a Sniffy cartoon and a Snippy dog in a cartoon, and he remembered his mother saying, "I'd love to name our next dog Snoopy," and that's how we got Snoopy. And he is so autobiographical. If you read the strip, you would know me. Everything I am goes into my strip. I've just talked to a reporter, and they said, "Is that true?" And I said, "Very much so." His themes, the history of his life, how he felt about things, his philosophy. So when you look up here, the left-hand corner, that's him on the bicycle with his uncle, and that's his cousin Corky, and they're living in Needles, California. At one point, they left St. Paul, the family left St. Paul when he was young, and they moved to Needles, California, and it didn't work out in terms of his father's barbershop and the work that he wanted to do, so they eventually went back to St. Paul. But that's why Spike lives in Needles, California. And then up here, he played hockey. He was a wonderful athlete, but and I don't think this picture represents it, but we have some slides of Woodstock and Snoopy playing hockey, and of course and there's one slide where Snoopy's trying to get Woodstock all, suited up, and he goes and gets newspapers and magazines, and he's going to tape them around the, shins, and of course it's taller than Woodstock, and it kind of ends with, I don't think that's going to work. Well, when Charles Schulz was young, he used to tape newspapers around his shins to protect him when he was playing hockey outside. And then, of course, Charlie Brown's dad is a barber. Charles Schulz's father was a barber. So this just represents the stories of his life as a man that are woven into his art and his characters. And then this one is one of my very, very favorite artifacts we have. Oh, the jewelry's falling off. It's very expensive. I don't know. I just don't know how I'm going to replace it. Anyway, this is when he took his first art class in high school. Kids, listen to this. This is a story about how wonderful I think teachers are. So he took one of his first high school art classes, and one day the teacher said, Miss Perot said, I want you just to do lessons of threes, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh my God, I am so sorry. I apologize. So do you want me to just click back and start over? And so sorry. So now I'm going to lean in. Okay. So what happened was she said, I just want to do lessons of threes for me, just 3 elements. And he was the first one to get it done. And you can see how prolific he is, how detailed his line is. He's about 15 or 16, so you really can pick up a boy's interest, and he draws his name, and he doesn't think much about it. Years later, after he's been on the cover of Time magazine, after he's given the world Merry Christmas, Charlie Brown, and everything else, she sends this to him and says, Happy New Year. Thank you for giving the world peanuts. So to me, this is such a wonderful statement about education and the role that teachers play in our lives. But he kept a relationship with her for the rest of his life after that. So I love this because it's such a wonderful statement. And then we get into the 40s and the 50s. He, like all young men of his generation, he went off to war. And for Charles Schulz, he was a very sheltered young man. He was an only child. Going off to war was very, very poignant for him and completely changed his life. Unfortunately for his deployment also was at the time when his mother was dying of cancer. So his mother passed away and 2 weeks before he was deployed. But that set the stage for him to enter the war feeling very lonely and very sad, and yet it turned out to be one of the best experiences for him in terms of learning more about himself and character building. And he left the Army as a staff sergeant. And then the other part of the 40s and the 50s is his job and the art instruction school in Minneapolis, St. Paul. It really was his college. It's where he got to know people. These artists, most of them had gone off to college and art school, so they were far more prolific and understood modern art and music. And that's where he really learned all of those elements of culture, were his friends from the art instruction school, who are also weaved into the strip, as you'll see. This is a great picture. Isn't that wonderful? Staff Sergeant Schulz. And as I said, it was so important to him. That is what he had put on his gravestone. Yes, since then there are lots of peanuts, statues and stuff, but that what was most important to him in his heart. And while he was in the war, he would draw. Can you imagine the guy who could draw? Of course you're going to draw on envelopes for your buddies. His favorite person and the man that he stayed close to all of his life was a gentleman named Sergeant Hagmeyer. He's the guy who saw this lonely little kid and put his arm around him basically and said, it's going to be okay, we're going to make it through. So he's the one who would draw all these things of what was going on and send him back to Hagmeyer's wife. So we have, Corey, how many do we have? 20? 19? Less than 20, so they're rare, and we love them. And this is really important to me for everyone to understand. Yes, he's a cartoonist, and he would tell you that he wasn't an artist because he had such respect for fine artists, but this man was an amazing illustrator, and he really knew how to draw. And we have his war journal, and we flip it, I don't know, every 6 months, a page, but you see the entire story of the war through his eyes as an artist, which is really quite wonderful. The Walt Disney Family Museum is 50 miles from us, and Walt Disney kept a journal like this. So 50 miles apart, we have two men who shaped the culture of the world, but when they were young, they each had war journals. It's amazing to see them side by side. One did World War I, and Schultz did World War II. And this is Art Instruction School. And this is so interesting because Corey's laughing because we've been spending weeks trying to figure out, do we have the right names and faces? Because we don't have all that information perfect yet. Thank gosh you have your people alive. You can just keep sitting them down and saying, tell me more and more. But what we do know is the woman to the far left, that's Frida. Frida of the curly hair. And that is Frank Wing in the back, the gentleman. You can thank him for peanuts in some ways, because when Sparky was drawing, you'll see in a minute, these individual panels, Frank is one of the people who said to Sparky, you know, you're doing really good with these little characters. You should keep drawing these little people. And that was kind of that encouragement. Charles Schultz is sitting there talking, and then I will tell you honestly, it's about a 90-20, 90-20, that's 100%. Don't listen to that, kids. So we think Charlie Brown is either this guy with the pipe or in the back. We're just not sure. We're still trying to get the nose and look, but we do know Charles Brown sat in front of him at one time. And they were friends, and they would pass him back, you know, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And then the man in the front that we think is important is Jim Sasseville. He would go on to work with Sparky and do ghosting of some of his work. And actually, Corey and the staff just opened a show last week, ghosting Schultz with some of Sasseville's work. So we love this, because this is the Art Instruction School. This was his college. This is where he was forever indebted to these men and women who helped shape his life. And I just wanted to show you how prolific he was in his ability. This is just early sketches from the 40s, and they almost look like Jules Feiffer, don't they, to some extent? And we keep discovering new ones. Our archivist went out and did an oral history with a gentleman named Hal Lampson, who is the last living artist who ever worked with Charles Schultz at the Art Instruction School, and he gave us a birthday card that Charles Schultz had drawn for Hal Lampson, and it's very, very simple, and it's just an artist sitting in front of an easel that's about like, you know, 1/4 of an inch long and 10 feet tall, because he's drawing the tree that's of the same dimensions, the canvas, trying to get the artist. So this, I just wanted to show you, and this is to the left there, that's the world's tallest snowman, of course the stick with the head on top. And you're starting to see this wonderful clarity of ability to succinctly tell stories in short words. And there she is. This is the little redheaded girl who truly did break his heart. He had gone off. He had started dating Donna. She was in the accounting office, and he coached the girls' baseball team, and she got on the baseball team. However, she was born and raised in St. Paul, and when she had met Charles Schultz, she was also dating a boy named Ed, who she had known through her church, and they were very close. But the story goes, Charles Schultz goes off to New York. United Feature Syndicate says, okay, we're going to do it. Let's do it. He gets back on the train. He comes home, asks her to marry him, and she says no. because Ed has already asked her the night before. And quite honestly, out of due respect to her and her family and values at the time, she said, well, I feel that my parents and I talked about it, and Ed's family and my family go to the same church, and we know him a little more, and so, and she and her husband stayed married and she's still alive, and we just interviewed her again. But I love it. It's so sweet. And so it is forever true that he was rejected by the first girl that he really, really fell in love with. And of course, the redheaded thing really worked for me in high school. I'm telling you, I cut those strips out, giving them to my boyfriend. He's like, I get it. We don't sit on the lunch benches outside. I'm like, I know, but you could do I'm not doing the peanut butter sandwich thing. Okay, and this is the panel that converted into Peanuts, Little Folks. Interesting enough, we just discovered about 2 weeks ago a tiny anecdotal piece. I call this the puzzle. We're always putting the puzzle together of his life. I was listening to a video a couple weeks ago, and one of the commentators said, well, and then when his first panel was called Judy Said. What Judy said? We've never said anything about Judy Said. I run upstairs to Corey and our archivist, and I'm like, who's Judy Said? And they're like, you're getting old, Karen, you don't hear things right. But we discovered, and Corey did the research, and we found out that before it was called Little Folks, it was called Judy Said. So anyway, these were the panels that he was doing. They were in the St. Paul Pioneer for a while as single panels because you could move them around. But then he also sent strips to United Features. So these were the guys who were the precursors, as you can tell, to the characters. And then we're going to go into just some Peanut style. I always start with, aren't those great shots of him over the years? That first shot at the top is his first official photograph when he had moved. The art instruction school, when he got syndicated, they gave him an office upstairs, and it allowed him to do his work there. And this one was done probably in the late 70s, and this one was done by Josef Karsh, and it's been inducted into the National Portrait Gallery. And I always kind of laugh, and I think, yeah, Sparky, we got the one in the National Portrait Gallery that makes you look like Cary Grant. But also, we actually have the Sunday that he was working on in that particular strip, and we also have the felt tip pen carousel. So it's very, very nice that we have the entire composition of that. So I just want to talk a little bit about his art and his style. I know Corey went into much detail today, but one of the things we talk about when people come to the museum is we want to tell the autobiographical story, because that's really what Peanuts is about. But we also want people to understand his art and his style. So I always talk about the fact when you look at our early strips, you can tell there's so much detail. Leaves have shading, and there's picket fences and shadowing. And you'll notice that the zigzag still is solid. Also in the early strips, you'll see in a minute, the head's about 50% to what the body is. As they evolve, it's about 1/4 to 3/4, but you see this shifting happening, and you start losing all of this detail as the years go on, and you get the same kind of emotion. And see, here we are into the broad brush strokes, and I love the fact that even though this has some busyness in it, like the other one did, you'll see that a lot of the detail is dropped out. And especially when you look over here, the inference to a comic book rack is pretty impressionistic. Whereas before, you might have even seen letters in detail, and you might have even seen wood carving. And then here's just kind of the evolution of the character over time. I love this because it's Charlie Brown playing baseball. But you look at the top one, and there you really get this sense of 50% head, 50% body. You also have a 28-year-old who's got a really steady hand and is able to, control his brush. These are in the 70s, probably. Corey could probably correct me, but I think it's probably around the 70s, the middle one, don't you think? And you'll see the hand's getting looser, the hat's getting a little larger on the head, it's getting a little more, although the one at the top is pretty minimalistic. And then you get down here to the late 90s, and the lines are a little more squiggly, the hat's a little more off-center. And one of the things I should tell you, after 1987, he had heart surgery, and we cannot say, he was left with something called an intentional tremor, and we can't say it's directly related to the heart surgery, but as he got older, he had more squiggle going on. And he was such a Midwest man. There were people who would approach him later in life and say, "Oh, Mr. Schultz, that the way you do your lines so simply with the squiggles." And he'd be like, "Are you people crazy? I have an intentional tremor. I'm trying to control it." And the reality is, Jeannie has told me many times, and Edna, his secretary, that they'd go in there and they'd see him late in life. He was such a journeyman. He drew his own strips, holding his wrist to steady his hand when he was drawing near the end of his life. He was pretty devoted. So you get a real sense of the character evolution here. And then I love this, because a lot of people think, and we love telling this story, we know that people come to our museum because they have an emotional connection, either to a character, a storyline, and they don't really know that these characters evolved over time. The bird, the very first couple of years, the bird was a black crow. A really well-drawn black crow. But here you see the evolution of the friendship. And early on, Snoopy was just a puppy. He wasn't a smart aleck. He kind of was like, we have some early strips of the bird, pulling a worm out of the ground, and Snoopy the dog going, "Ew." But you can see in this top strip, early on, the bird's kind of like in charge, and leaves the dog or the puppy kind of wondering. And then you get into I'd say the early 60s, the birds start getting more existential, but they also start showing up in groups. So he has for a while, Snoopy's got friends with a group of birds. And then like anybody that any of you know, or if you are writers, writers will tell you, and people will say, "Well, where'd Woodstock come from?" He says, "I don't know, he just popped out one day. His little beak was a little wilder." And so, of course, then you end with these wonderful storylines that most of us are drawn to, which is Snoopy and Woodstock's relationship over the years. And yes, he named the bird after the Woodstock Festival. Once again, he's such a practical man. He said, "Well, of course it's named after the Woodstock Festival. That's all that anybody was talking about that summer." Just like Peppermint Patty is named after Peppermint Patty candies. He said, "I'm walking through my living room one day and I see these peppermint patties in in our living room, and I'm like, I need to create a character with that name before someone else does." So that's how we got Peppermint Patty. So that just kind of gives you a sense of how these characters evolved and changed over the years. And he would tell you he loved slapstick humor. So having Snoopy and Woodstock play off each other, he loved it when they fell off the doghouse occasionally, and so that's how the relationship started. And he struggled with Woodstock being the secretary for a while, didn't know how to genderfy that, girl, boy, so he dropped that and they just became best friends. And then this is my favorite stuff, I think. Okay, I have messed up technology again. Hi. Okay, there you go. This is just some of my favorite strips, and how at times the artistic genius of this man is he can evoke emotion, laughter, surprise, empathy, humanity without even using a word. I mean, this is very early. So you see, Snoopy's still not in charge, and he thinks, "Oh, you're going to do something. Okay, that must mean food," and finds out it's marbles. But this one, to me, is the most poignant. The little guy suiting up just so he can sit in front of the TV and have the total experience. And of course, this one in the late 70s is so universally poignant in Linus's sweetness and relationship to the universe. And then this last slide I'm going to show you. This is the second time this slide has ever been shown in public. Oh, no, it's not. I'm not there yet. Hi, I'm old. And now I'm talking about the strips. I'm sorry, I didn't finish this off. I wanted to show you some of the things that when we have artists come through, they want to see the stuff that has not been finished because it gives them more information. I know you all may have heard that we have a movie coming out in November 15, and Blue Sky, the animators, I will tell you, are some of the finest people I've met, who are completely devoted to Charles Schulz and his black line. And when we would bring them in to the museum, all they wanted to do was spend time looking at these type of strips so they could look at the line art. They could look at how his pencil moved. So this gives you these, and we don't know why. We have no idea why he didn't like them. But he threw them away, and then one of his assistants, Dale Hale, I think this is the Dale Hale group, would keep them. And he was a practical guy. He'd say, "What are you doing? That's garbage." And Dale would be like, "That's what you think." So thank you, Dale, for saving them for us, because it gives us information. Okay. Okay. I'm known around the country for ruining the most magnificent technology systems. Okay, here. There we go. So that's just a Sunday. Somehow Peppermint Patty was staged and he'd already had some wording in it, and we just don't know. But people love seeing these. Okay, I'm gonna go very gently. There we go. I love this one. This is just Charles Schulz and Bill Melendez sitting around when they're doing the Christmas, I don't know if it's a Christmas movie, I don't know if it's Thanksgiving, I don't know if it's a Beagle, but they were sitting around one day, and Schulz did the first 2 panels, and Bill Melendez did the last 2 panels. Isn't that great? It's a wonderful kind of insight to these artists who are working. And then the Hagmeyers. Okay, this we're fascinated by. We discovered these about 3 or 4 years ago. There's 5 of them, we think, because we own 4 of the 5. We don't know the story behind these. But when you look at them, and I have to say you, this is conjecture on my part especially, but most of us reach the same conclusion, but we can't say it's a definitive fact. We know why they're called Hagmeyers. This takes him back to the war and his respect and love of Sergeant Hagmeyer, who kind of mentored him. But when you look at them, I say, it's Lucy Linus and Charlie Brown, 50 years later, working. Because when you look at some of the elements of the art design, look at Lucy's hair. Wouldn't that have been what happened to the Bobs over years? Look at the hair on this guy. Isn't that Linus losing his hair, it would appear? And the blandness of the other guy's face. You know, Charlie Brown's face is so bland. And then you see the personalities out of these 2 strips. Lucy's in charge. They're like, okay, whatever you want to do. The interaction between the Linus-looking character and the Charlie Brown character is Linus kind of going, I don't know, and Charlie Brown, I surrender. So we still to this day do not know if he was thinking of creating a new strip. We don't know, but we love them. They're so great. His son, his second son, who's producing the movie, Craig's in all the time, and Craig is, I love Craig. And we were showing these to the Blue Sky animators because they also like to see him draw things other than, you know, Peanuts, because then they get a better sense of his hand. And Craig hadn't seen him, and Craig is so funny. He goes, well, he made those for Sergeant Hagmeyer's birthday. I said, you are lying through your teeth. You do not know that. He goes, well, I think that's what they are, so we should write that down. I said, we're not writing it down until you get me verification, Craig Schulz. Anyway, he's standing by it. He thinks they were birthday gifts for Hagmeyer. No, they weren't. Don't listen to it. And he really, really did not like to travel. He was a guy, and it's true, I want to be home in bed, you know, like Snoopy. But his wife, Jeannie, said, no, we're going to travel. So occasionally they did. So let me show you some of those slides. This is his children in a Life magazine spread. These are his 5 children. This is Meredith up there. Monty is in the little guy in the pool. Amy, behind them, that's Craig. And then that's Jill. Am I looking at that right, Corey? I think Jill's right there, the little one. Anyway, those are his 5 biological children. And this is Jean Schulz, his second wife, who also has 2 children of her own. They married in early 70s. Come on. And I just wanted to show you some of his other drawings that he did. That left-hand corner, that's his mom. We have no idea why he put Lucy in Jacqueline Onassis's inaugural, but we think it's special, and of course, being of that generation, I thought it was really, really terrific. And when Carolyn Kennedy was made the ambassador to Japan, we sent her a copy of this along with the 3 strips where Linus talks about Carolyn, the little girl in the White House who doesn't have a blanket. And he says to Lucy, get me their address. Maybe they can't afford a blanket for her. So, just get the address. I'll send her a blanket. Because she's trying to say, that little girl doesn't have a blanket. And he's like, she probably needs one. And we heard back from Ambassador Kennedy, and she's framed him and put her in her office in Japan. And then down here, I love this. This is just him sketching. There's a crazy lady who worked at the ice arena that he loved named Dottie. So he saw Dottie doing something one day, and he left it on her desk. But this is one of my very favorite things. This is just, can you imagine, at art schools, when you're sending around a birthday card with all these artists? Well, this is just a birthday card for Priscilla. And you've got Charlie Brown write something up there. Charlie Brown did the Madame Bovary. But this long, lean stick figure over here, that's what Charles Schultz drew, And he says, who says I can't draw figures over 2.5 inches, characters over 2.5 inches? But I love that, because that just shows his humor. Okay. And then I love this. Yeah, as you can imagine, the Beethoven thing. People thought Beethoven was his favorite composer. No, Beethoven was not his favorite composer. Brahms was his favorite composer. But as he would tell you, Beethoven sounds funnier than Brahms. And when you think about it, it's true. Brahms, no. Beethoven, yes. So it was Beethoven's birthday, and for his friends, he got white sweatshirts and drew Beethoven on them. So we have a couple of them. And then this is his satchel his drawing satchel. He drew some English countryside on it when they were on their trip. And then there they are. She got him out. This is one of their first trips to England to visit her family. Jeannie has English relatives. And this is a trip to Alaska where he looks like Jacques Cousteau. When I went, Jeannie, he looks like Jacques Cousteau. She goes, I know, another one of my heroes. Isn't that great? And I'm like, he does. It's so silly. We don't have many of these, I can tell you. And there they are. I think this is the 50th anniversary. This is near the end of his life. He did go back for the D-Day celebration in Aunt Betty's backyard, and he drew, and I'm going to show you some pictures. And be aware of that tree, because I'm going to show you right now. Felt tip. That's Aunt Betty's house. And there's the tree. So, okay. So this is the strip that has only been seen twice. And I think it's so poignant to end on this, and I thank Mrs. Schultz forever for letting me start putting this out there, because she is still very sensitive about this last particular strip we're showing. But when he became very, very ill, and he realized that his life, he was limited, he was not going to be here long, and he was going to have to stop the strip, it was beyond heartbreaking for him, as I would imagine it would be for anyone in life. I don't mean to be disrespectful to anyone. But the thing that's very, very poignant about this is a week after surgery, heart surgery, and all the surgeries they had to do, when he was starting to feel a little better, the first thing he asked for was, it always makes me cry, was a nurse's piece of paper out of her chart. And he just wanted to see if he could do it one more time. So that's probably one of the very last drawings that Charles Schultz did. And as you can see, it's with his beloved dog, Snoopy. But the most important thing, I think, about the story of this man and the responsibility we have at the museum is to tell his story that we know touches all of us. It's the humanity in those characters that gave us laughter, poignancy, direction, subtleties of life that every day we still use in our language. Good grief, security blanket, all of those variables. So it's such an honor to present this man's legacy in a building that represents a legacy of a man that I have so much respect for what he has done in the world. So thank you so much for having us. And the only other question I have, what I think could be a problem for this country, is where will you put the other Clinton library?
I don't know what you're talking about. So. Well, I just want to thank all of you and let you know that you may now go see our two fabulous exhibits. One is located downstairs in the lobby in the Garden View room, and the other exhibit is located upstairs in the gallery across from the Oval Office. You'll also be able to continue enjoy refreshments in here. So again, thank you again for coming. And don't forget again tomorrow morning, another free program at 10 a.m. We'll be here at the Clinton Center. We'll be 10 to 2, have special programs throughout the day for children and families. So please enjoy. Thanks again.